be heard, they must alert the chair host as soon as possible. May see members looking away from their screens at times. This is because they will need to look at an additional screen or device containing their papers. I'll now hand over to the chair for the welcome and introductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's meeting. We'll go through introductions first, and then I'll ask Jenny for any apologies. So I'm Councillor Andy Bainbridge. I'll be chairing the meeting this afternoon, and I see Ruth just joining us. That's wonderful. So if you could unmute yourselves, it's a bit different because I have to say your name for you to be able to say who you are. But if you can unmute yourselves and then mute yourselves again, and then just indicate when you want to speak, unless I bring you in. So I will go in clockwise order as I can see you on the screen. So it's mixed up. So the one next to me is Adam.
All right, I'm Councillor Adam Hurst, member of the committee.
Thank you. Matt Proctor.
Good afternoon, I'm Matthew Proctor. I'm the Sports Grounds and Events Lead Officer for the Council.
Thank you. Mick
Councillor Mick Rooney.
Thank you. Cliff.
I'm Councillor Cliff Woodcraft.
Dawn.
I'm Councillor Dawn Dale.
Roger.
Roger Davison, also councillor.
Mary Claire. So I'm just going round in order as I can see you. It's easiest.
Mary Claire Frankie, solicitor to the subcommittee or committee as well.
Thank you. Steve Lonier.
Steve Lonier, I'm the Chief Licensing Officer and Head of Licensing for Sheffield City Council.
Thank you. Karen.
Councillor Karen McGowan, co-chair for licensing.
Vicky.
Councillor Vicky Priestley.
Josie.
Councillor Josie Patrick, licensing committee member.
Jim.
Councillor Jim Stanky, member of the licensing committee.
Thank you. Bob.
Good afternoon, Councillor Bob Pullen, licensing committee.
Douglas.
Councillor Douglas Johnson, City Ward.
Thank you. And Ruth. Last but certainly not least.
Councillor Ruth Mercer on the licensing committee.
Right, thank you. So if you could have your mute on and put your hand up when you want to speak, because there are quite a few of us. So if everybody starts talking at once, it could be difficult. So Jenny, do we have any apologies, please?
Apologies for absence from Sharon Mayor Richards, councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any items for exclusion of the public and press?
No.
No, none of those today. That's good. Do any of the members of the committee have any declarations of interest other than the fact that some of us may support one of the football teams of the two that we may be discussing this afternoon? I don't think that's necessary. And any declarations of interest? No. So we then go on to the minutes of the subcommittee meetings that have been held since our last meeting. I hope everybody's had time to read through them rather than having to go through them individually. And particularly if you were on that committee, if you've had chance to read through and check that they are a true record of that meeting. So unless anybody's got any, Karen.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask, the one that I did, I think it was page 20 or around page 20. I don't know if it's normal or not, but the name of the company that we were considering or the premise isn't mentioned anywhere within that. I looked at the one previously that Andy had done and the name of the premise was in that one. So it was just when I was reading it, I was trying to bring to my mind which case it was. And then I realised and I thought, nowhere in here does it say which, and I don't know if that's what we're supposed to do or not. And Mary Claire? Sorry.
For some reason that was a closed meeting.
Yeah, it was a closed meeting.
That's why, because it was a closed meeting. Right, thank you. Right, so in that case, are we all in agreement that they are a true record? Other than that, you can just raise your hands. Thank you. Right, and then we go on to the minutes of the last meeting, which were on the, I can get there, which were on the emergency officer delegations, a response to the current situation with coronavirus, COVID-19. Again, I hope you've all had a chance to look through that and that you're all happy that that's a correct record of the proceedings that day. Is everybody happy with that? Would appear so. There doesn't seem to be many problems there. I don't think it's necessary to have a show of hands. If nobody's got a problem, we should be okay. So we then move on to the presentation in this meeting of the update on those delegated powers. Am I handing over to you, Steve Lanier?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Chair, whether it'd be possible to let Matt Proctor do the sports grounds reports first.
Yes, that's okay with me. Is anybody objections to doing the sports grounds first? No, so that's okay. So Matt, if you'd like to do that first, that's fine, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. This is report number 62 of 2020, and it's dealing with the issue of general safety certificates to both Sheffield United at Bramall Lane and Sheffield Wednesday at Hillsborough, in no particular order. The purpose of the report is to inform members of the decision of the Chief Licensing Officer, Steve Lanier, to issue general safety certificates to both those stadiums. Now, by way of brief introduction, Secretary of State has designated both those stadiums as stadiums requiring general safety certificates, and that's in accordance with the Safety of Sports Grounds Act 1975. And indeed, the council have issued safety certificates to those stadiums since 1975 and on a rolling basis since then every year. Section 3 is the background. You will be aware that COVID-19 pandemic caused the postponement of football fixtures in this country back in March. Now, following the advice of the government, those fixtures resumed June of this year, but behind closed doors, that is without spectators. Now, the government placed certain conditions on those fixtures being allowed to be played, and that meant that we needed to amend the safety certificates accordingly. Officers in writing those safety certificates took advice from government and from the Sports Ground Safety Authority when drafting those documents. I can tell you that we did issue certificates for Hillsborough on the 19th of June, that was before their first fixture, and for Bramall Lane on the 26th of June, again, for their first fixture. We also served copies of the certificates on South Yorkshire Police and the Sports Ground Safety Authority. Section 4, terms and conditions. With your permission, Chair, I don't intend to read those out, but the certificates do deal with various issues, including medical services, stewarding, capacities, and inspections and testing. Section 5, we did, but the legislation does require that we advertise the issue of those certificates. I can confirm to you that they were issued in the Sheffield Telegraph on the 2nd of July this year. Financial implications, there are none, for the council at least, arising from this report. And I will finish with the recommendation. It's purely to ask you to note that the Chief Licensing Officer has issued these safety certificates to our stadiums.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions of Matt? I'll write names down so everybody gets a chance. Okay. Got Roger and Karen so far. Douglas. Anyone else? Cliff. Right, and Ruth. Right, so we'll start with Roger then.
Thank you, Chair. Because of the problem with COVID, were you able to give us just as thorough an inspection as you would normally?
I can't hear you.
No, it's gone. It sounds gone. Sorry.
Ordinarily, in the summer months,
All right, we can hear you now.
we would ask South Yorkshire Police, the fire service, the ambulance, health and safety, amongst others, to carry out inspections and produce a report on any works that would need to be done in terms of the safety certificate. Quite clearly, that hasn't been able to happen this year. They are still programmed to happen as soon as people are up and working, but we're taking the view that because there are no spectators in the stadium, then those safety issues are reduced significantly.
Okay, thank you. Is that all, Roger? Yeah. Karen?
Yeah, it's just whether it's a typing error or not, but on 3.2 in the report where it says background, it says June 2017. Is that correct, or should it be June 2020?
It should read June 2020, Councillor. Apologies.
That's all right. That's all. Thanks.
So we're going to Douglas.
Thank you. Matt, I know it's for information, but is there anything in particular you want to draw our attention to in this new report or these new certificates? And in particular, is there anything that's different from last year's that's of significance that you think we should know about?
Thank you, Councillor. There's nothing significantly different other than we've taken out the provision of alcohol and mostly spectator-related conditions because there are no spectators at the moment. We fully hope and expect that once we get back to spectators in the stadiums, then we will be more or less reverting to last year's standard of certificate.
Right, well, thanks. Actually, that is quite significant. So does that mean that these certificates will only last for a certain duration? How long will they be valid for? And what triggers them becoming reverting to the other ones? Or is there a danger that these certificates could go on and that once proper matches take up again, there could be no restrictions on? What's the mechanism for the next steps then?
In normal circumstances,
sorry, I was meaning now, with these certificates that are being issued now, what brings them back into line once the pandemic is over, whatever that means?
Well, these certificates are tied into the COVID regulations, the COVID regulations England and Wales 2020, I think it is.
Okay.
As soon as the government repeals those regulations, we'll need to review the certificates again.
Right, okay, thanks very much.
Is that okay? Thanks, Ruth. She doesn't need to answer a question. Cliff?
Yes, I'm in the same position as Ruth. I mean, Douglas has asked the same question that I was going to ask. So
okay, thank you. Does anybody else wish to ask a question? Adam?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, obviously I was really clearly no problem with what Matt's fed back. Just want to check because I mean I was watching the news yesterday. Now I know, for instance, that some cricket grounds are letting limited number of spectators back in, and I'm sort of making the guess that football and rugby and other outdoor sports might have the same gradual approach. Do we know what the licensing implications will be on the sports grounds? I'm thinking particularly on things like hand sanitizers, provision of toilets. Toilets can get very crowded at half time at Hillsborough, let me tell you. So I was just wondering, and possibly you could be forgiven for thinking the central government at the moment does things by the seat of the pants. So are we actually anticipating what we might need to do if there is some sort of gradual return back to spectators going to the grounds? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor. You may or may not be aware that the World Snooker at Crucible is being run as a test event for allowing some spectators back in the city. The government would like to see at least some spectators back into our football stadiums by the 1st of October. I've got a meeting arranged with one of the clubs on Wednesday to start discussing what their proposals might be for at least a gradual return for numbers of spectators. The infrastructure within both grounds is capable or should be capable of coping with 32 and 35,000 spectators respectively in each stadium. So we have no real concerns over the amount of toilets, the amount of concessions at each ground. But obviously with increased social distancing required, and those are the sort of plans that each ground is going to have to put together for our own approval and our partners' approvals.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Mick?
Yeah, it's just in response to what you said about toilet provision. And I'm talking about Bramall Lane. I don't I don't believe that there is adequate provision for female spectators in that situation, and particularly not given the COVID situation. So I suppose I'm putting a slight doubt on what you just said, because yeah, male, I would agree. Female, no, I wouldn't.
Okay, one of our partner agencies responsible for assessing the sports grounds are our health and safety and environmental protection, and they apply minimum numbers of toilets that are required for both male and female. The information we have is that they're happy with those numbers. I happen to know the cop at Bramall Lane very well, and I happen personally, not professionally, to agree with you, Councillor Rooney.
Anything we can do about it?
I think it's, so long as they meet the minimum standards, then it's about the clubs being more proactive in wanting to look after their, what you might term to be their most loyal supporters in that area of the ground.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other councillors?
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back in? Just following up what others asked me before. Just when it's so these certificates stay in force until the council revokes them, which could be after a change in the order issued by government. I'm just wondering about the risk of the government suddenly changing, changing the rules to skip out of pandemic mode, and us then being caught on the hop because it'll take some time to devise a new safety certificate. I'm sure this is covered, but is there any danger of the clubs being caught in some limbo where they've either got a certificate which isn't appropriate to in-person matches, or no certificate at all for some reason? Is there a plan for continuity, in other words?
Thank you, Councillor. It's something I've discussed with both Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday about the possibility of coming out of this thing quicker than any of us could expect. And both clubs are working on their plans for that. In the event of the government announcing that we can go back to full capacities almost immediately, I dare say my boss, Steve Lonnie, will be cancelling my leave, and we'll be working night and day to try and get the safety certificates ready so that we can get the people of Sheffield back into stadiums.
Okay, I probably urge that work does take place as soon as it can, just because I'm anticipating this government's going to make a sudden random order when no one's really expected it and with very short notice to any of us. So yeah, they're not particularly helpful. But okay, I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
It is something we've thought about, Councillor, and we are aware of it. Yes.
I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? I don't have any questions. I think everybody's covered those. Mary Claire, do you have any questions? No? In that case, Steve, do you wish to speak to the recommendation?
It's Matt to speak to it.
It is Matt. It's just as it says not the decision of the chief licensing officer.
I know. I mean,
I was asking if you wanted to say anything.
No, as everybody said, I mean, like I think Councillor Johnson's right. The crux of this is, I don't think it's going to be a problem if they go back to full capacity, because we have safety certificates that deal with that. I think it's more if they all of a sudden say, well, we'll allow 30% in the ground or 50%. and that's when we're going to have to redo all calculations and everything. But the onus is on the clubs. But like Matt says, there's plenty of hours in a day for him to work, so keep him busy. But no, I think we're prepared. Matt's already organising meetings with both clubs to start thinking about what's going to happen. And certainly our health protection service and people are all aware that it's coming. I do think the new season is due to start in September, I believe. So we're going to have to be ready for it, whatever. We'll make sure things are in place. If we're not, then obviously they'll continue playing behind closed doors until a new safety certificate is ready. That is the ultimate option, obviously. We can't let supporters in if we're not sure they're safe.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Ruth has a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, Matt, if you could post a link to the 5 stages that are mentioned in the report, the government's 5 stages. When I've tried looking on the government website, there's the same information that is on the printed document that you've given us, but no more. There's nothing about stages 1, 2, 4 or 5, but only about stage 3. It'd be really useful to know what the various stages are and what needs to happen for progression to the next one.
Yeah, I could circulate that post meeting, councillor. That's not a problem. It is a government document, and I understand it is on the government website, but I can sort that out for you.
Yeah, thank you. I did try it on the government website, but there was only part information there, and I couldn't get any more than what was on the document that you sent round, unfortunately. So that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If that covers all the questions, so we note that decision, and I'm sure we'll be looking with great interest when the new season starts as to. I don't often agree with Douglas, but I do on this government. They may well just change everything overnight. We never know, like happening with Spain at the moment. So it's a case of everybody keeping their eyes and ears open and see what goes on.
But what makes you say that, Andy?
Oh, that speaks our latent, so remember. Right, so if we're all happy with that we note that decision, and as I say, look to any changes that may come for the new season. We say thank you to Matt for that presentation. Thank you for taking part.
Thank you, Chair.
I assume if you wish to go at this point, you're able to, but you equally, we're happy for you to stay.
I will take my leave of you, councillors, and I will get on with safety certificate work. Thank you for your time.
I'm sure you've plenty to do. Thank you. Thank you.
you.
Bye. Right, in that case then, we will now go back to the emergency delegated powers that we're being updated on today. So if I can now hand over to you, Steve.
Yeah, this is report 61 of 2020. It's the second update and review of the temporary emergency officer delegations given to myself. The background, Chair, set out in paragraph 2 is obviously that the delegations were put into place on the 27th of April, and it sets out the resolution there. At paragraph 3, it explains that the delegations have been in place now for 12 weeks. It might be 13 weeks roughly. They've been used very sparingly, but they have made a difference, and certainly for licensees in different areas. I think where things might have taken quite a bit of time to get reports done and get them before committee and get them resolved, it has been quick and efficient, and I certainly know quite a few taxi drivers have been very appreciative of how quickly things have been able to be dealt with. Just going through some of the systems that we've used the powers for, in taxis, as you know, we've reviewed vehicles where they're going beyond their age limits, mostly private hire vehicles. We stopped undertaking intermediate vehicle tests, and that will continue certainly in the short term. We're looking to review that possibly in October. We stopped undertaking the compliance test, which was the additional part of what's added on to the MOT, but we've now restarted that because the resources are now available back at the test station. Transport services have got their staff back in work. We've had a license deferral scheme, so they can defer the renewal if the drivers aren't working, and they've handed in the plate to us under the plate surrender and retention scheme. So we've helped them as much as we can. We've had not as much appetite for it as we thought. We thought that there might be quite a few applications to defer licenses and hand the plates in, but we've not had as many as we thought. Animal health licensing, we've issued some short-term extension of licenses, just because certainly some of the renewals not all the renewals up in animal health come up at the same time. So some that have come up in the last few weeks or last couple of months, we deferred until October, because they're not trading, but we've left them and said, obviously, if it did come to a stage where they could trade, then they would be licensed and we'd renew them in October. Street trading first. Just a few short-term consents that we've dealt with and renewed to assist the traders. There is some quarterly fees that we've waived. Quarterly fees would normally be paid in April, then again in July. And for quite a few, we've waived the July fee, meaning as they've not been able to trade throughout the first quarter, just about. Civil marriages, only one on this. There was a civil marriage renewal. We didn't do the actual inspection. We've deferred that. We did renew the license, but we've deferred the inspection until we're able to get all the authorities out to do the joint inspection. That'll be done as soon as we can. And then payment cafes, as you're probably aware, we did set up our own council temporary scheme to allow people to apply for a pavement cafe license. We chose not to charge for that. I think we've had about 30 applications, 35 applications. The new government legislation's come into force I think it was last week, it finally got passed and everything. So we're quickly just adapting the little bits in ours that doesn't match up with the government one. But we're still taking the approach that we're not going to charge businesses for this. I think it's more important that we support the businesses and get them up and running again and get them back on the feet. There's no financial implications, Chair, in paragraph 4 regarding the actual delegations themselves. However, as I've said in 4.2, we are now facing a potential financial deficit at the end of the current financial year, which at the moment is projected to be around about 200k. I think that will increase. But obviously that depends on where we go now with the pandemic. And obviously, as we don't want another flare up of the pandemic, but hopefully we will be able to get all fees and charges back in place. I'm talking to the cabinet member at the moment about the fees report, because we were going to obviously put the fees report to you in March. But we thought it was the wrong time to be doing it, as all businesses were shutting down in March. It wasn't fair to put up fees and ask them for money. Legal implications, Chair, set out at paragraph 5. There's no specific legal implications from the delegations. We've been placed in lockdown since March. We've adjusted our method and style of operation. 90% of the time we're working from home. Staff do go into the office 1 day a week, split in half or split into thirds actually. They go in and just do a 1 day, mainly to print plates and print badges for taxis, because that's one of the few things we can't do from home. I have set out at 5.3, Chair, the different legislation that's impacted on us while we've been going through the pandemic. There's obviously the Coronavirus Act 2020, which is the main act, which puts all the key things in place. Then underneath that, and sits underneath that, is the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions Regulations. That then sets out all the different regulations. And then as things have progressed each time, they've then released guidance and legislation with regards to reopening of pubs and which businesses remain closed. And if at 5.4, the only ones that we deal with now that remain closed are generally your large scale events, like your football grounds, your pop concerts, festivals. They all remain closed at the moment. Casinos, nightclubs, sexual entertainment venues. So they all remain closed. I think there's a talk of them starting to reopen soon. We'll just have to, like I said, in the sports ground report, we'll have to keep his eye on that and react to it as it happens. And that's it, Chair, but I'm quite happy to answer any questions. As you know, we have got a training session after, which I can also pick up some of the questions as we go through the different systems that we operate.
I've got Karen. Is there anyone else, Douglas? I will write people down. Right, so at the moment I've just got Karen and Douglas. So Karen.
First of all, I just want to start by saying thank you to all staff in your team. I think they've done a terrific job right from the start. They were first department, section, whatever you call yourselves, to get set up and operating as quickly as they did under this, and to Mary Claire and all that support as well as Jenny. So I think it's worked really, really well and kept things going. I just wondered what the implications had been since pubs and things had started opening up and restaurants, and how the staff are, what the workload's like for them, and what issues, if any, that you've been experiencing since pubs have come back open.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, I do agree. Very lucky. The staff have been brilliant actually throughout this, and with this part that you just asked there about the reopening of the premises, again, it just really sums up the staff's attitude. It's the vast amount of the work that we're doing is out of hours. And it's on a voluntary basis, and we've not failed to fill the rota when we've asked. So we've been working the first weekend that pubs reopened. We worked on the Friday night, the Saturday afternoon, the Saturday night, the Sunday afternoon, and the Sunday night. We had something like 12 staff out on each shift. So as you can imagine, some people were working 2 shifts during the weekend. It wasn't too bad the first weekend. It was very quiet, really. A lot of pubs chose not to open until the following week. I think a lot thought, well, we'll just watch what other pubs do and we'll learn from their mistakes. There's 4 or 5 premises that over the 3 weekends, I think it is now, since they've been open, we've had problems with. We did a joint visit to 5 premises last Friday. I won't name those premises for obvious reasons, but we did 5 joint visits with the police and the Health Protection Service and warned them that they needed to get their house in order, or else we would be looking at stricter enforcement measures. But the vast majority, and I've got to say, and I have written to Unite, the sort of pub watch group, the vast majority of the premises have been excellent. They've got on with it, they've done what they have to do. And where they haven't, and we've gone to speak to them, they've been so happy to engage with us, and they've put things into place straight away. They've took tables out of the way, took chairs out. If we've said like they're a bit over capacity, they've just got on with it and done it. There's just the 4 or 5 chair that we're still ongoing with. To be fair, this weekend was a little bit quieter. I don't know why. We didn't have the same problems, but it's mostly the queuing, to be fair, outside premises, particularly on West Street. It's very difficult. There's not much space for them, and that's where we've been having the problems. Obviously, there's problems with loud music, but again, for us as an enforcing authority, as a local authority, it is only guidance that's being issued for a lot of this, and it's very difficult. Although the guidance says that they should avoid loud music, it doesn't say that they can't have it, and we can't enforce that. The only real thing that we can enforce is the social distancing, but we give advice on all the other issues, like loud music and people being seated and not stood, taking the contact details at the door, all that sort of stuff. But I've got to be fair, 95% of the trade have been brilliant. There's just a few problem premises, which I suppose is always going to be the case, no matter which system we'd be looking at. But all in all, I'm very happy, really.
Thank you. Thanks.
Right. Yes, thank you for that. I've had a message from Ruth saying that Dawn is having problems. I'm adding you to the list, Jamie, and Ruth doesn't seem to be with us either, so I think she's got problems as well. Douglas is next.
Thanks. Yeah, I see Ruth's logged in, but it was Dawn who disappeared, so I don't know if she's able to come back. I was just going to start. So thanks. I want to echo what Karen said about thanks, because it's quite difficult for the staff covering a lot of things, working from home with all the IT problems we know about. So pleased to know about that. Also, what was pleased about is the pavement cafe licenses have been able to do those free of charge, because that's probably really helpful at a time when a lot of cafes are feeling pretty down about things. So that's been good, and that seems to be a sensible step, because setting up a new system to administer all the payments would probably not be that easy for staff to do either. So good move there. Two things I was going to mention though. One is, you mentioned you've written to Unite. Would you be happy to forward a copy of that letter to me? It's quite useful because
it was an email, Councillor, but I will send everybody a copy.
Yeah, that'd be absolutely useful. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And then the other thing to come out is we were looking for the weekly record of delegations, because I think you were meant to send a weekly report to us, to the committee, saying, you know, just at least the number and the type of decisions that have been made under the delegated powers. And they were starting, and we mentioned at the last meeting they'd sort of dried up a bit, and then they restarted. But I don't think we've had any of those weekly reports for a bit. So
right. I will check on that. I'm not doing them, but I'll double check for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was a specific request this committee, as a condition of the delegated powers, that would be reported back. And it might be, if there's, in some weeks there are simply no decisions being made, it's still useful to have a record of that, just so that we know what decisions being made in our name, really. If you could check and
I will
reinstate those.
I'll do that immediately after the meeting and get it out to you. Yeah.
Right. Thanks very much. Okay, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Right, Jim.
Thanks, Steve. That was really helpful. I'm just wanting to follow up about the 5 or so problematic premises, and I really do accept that that's probably pretty good going, but it's still, five around that potentially undermines the line you're taking with other licensed premises, but also other kind of hospitality outlets that may feel that they're getting more heavily penalised and pressed than what pubs are. And I think that there's I suppose, so the question is really, at what point do you feel that enough is enough for those premises, and more decisive action perhaps needs to be taken, and more public action, I would argue as well, in terms of a lesson to others, really. I do appreciate that it's really difficult and it's the art of the possible, but I just worry that the longer it goes on, the more it undermines the position you're taking with other places as well, both licensed premises and others.
Yeah, I mean, we are working with the Health Protection Service across all hospitality premises, so I would hope that everybody is being treated the same and being dealt with at the same standard. The 5 premises, as I said, they had a joint inspection last Friday before the weekend to give them a final warning. I've received the reports this morning from the officers working over the weekend, so I'll be going through those this week. If any of those premises are again misbehaving or not following the social distancing, then we will be taking enforcement action this week. We decided that last week. Like you say, there's got to be a time when we stop warning them and telling them and take action. So yeah, if any of those 5 premises were having problems again with social distancing, it is more than likely that enforcement action will be taken this week, which could, I'm not saying it will, but could result in the premises being closed.
Okay, yeah, happy with that, thank you. Any more questions? Roger?
Thank you, Chair. What's the position with loud amplified music in parks? Is there what's the license?
By members of the public?
Yeah.
Mary Claire might be better for this one, but as far as I know, I mean, I don't think there's control over the members of the public in such any regulations, but I'll let Mary Claire answer that one.
I'm thinking particularly in Endcliffe Park, there were people dancing. Now, they weren't doing any harm. They, you know, everything was going up all right. Whether they were socially distancing is questionable, but they had big loud amplifiers. Now, I didn't know what the situation was as regard licensing. Thank you.
Mary Claire, are you going to answer that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Endcliffe Park, unless there's a temporary event notice on, which I wouldn't know about specifically, isn't licensed. So that'll just be for the police to deal with it as a mass gathering. So it's not the same as being in a pub where they're advised to not do things that would encourage people to shout or sing or chant, which obviously then encourages the aerosol transmission of the virus. So the guidance and the legislation steers clear of saying you can't have football, you can't have loud music, you can't have this, but instead warns that they shouldn't be doing things that would encourage people to chant, sing, etc. And it's for each premises to manage how they do that. So they can have music, so long as somehow in there they're also controlling people aren't singing and shouting and that type of thing. So it's, I think even if licensing were to see people singing and that sort of thing, there would have to be a stepped approach to it. And they've obviously got a plan, an enforcement plan on that. But yeah, there's nothing specific that says what a pub can and cannot do, other than you can't do things that would encourage people to chant, sing, such as sell alcohol, I would suggest. But yeah, they've decided that sports and loud music are the things that a landlord should focus on.
Thank you, Mary Claire. Is that okay, Roger?
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Can I say welcome back to Dawn? We seem to have lost Vicky now, unfortunately. It seems to be one of those afternoons. Could I just really echo what Karen has said? I'd like you to pass on our sincerest thanks to your staff for the way that they've worked and reacted to this pandemic. There's been a particular issue in my own ward that they've worked very hard and very quickly, and I'm very pleased that things have been working as they should. So, you know, well done to them. There's just one thing I wanted to mention. You and I have discussed it by email, and that is pictures for street trading. You did suggest that could be something that could go into delegated powers. Certainly the reason for my email was the fact that if there's a TRO on that particular spot, there isn't much point it coming to the licensing committee because we can't ward over those. So it would make sense if you were able to deal with those first, and that we dealt with cases that we could rule on. So I wondered if you could. Everybody keeps moving around. So I wondered if you could just comment on that, please, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, generally with any application that comes before us, whether it be a taxi, a street trade or anything, once the application is made, we can't refuse it unless the actual applicant withdraws it. We can only grant them if there's no objection. Obviously, generally, when they're in breach of, let's say, a policy or anything like that, we advise them to withdraw it and say, look, the policy says this, it probably won't get granted at licensing committee. But if they said, well, look, we still want to go ahead, then obviously we have to refer them to yourselves. But I do think with street trading, probably, I mean, we could probably do it under the emergency delegated powers, but I did leave it as it was. But certainly, I think now the position with TROs has changed since the potential judicial review that we was facing as well. So I think it's something that we could probably cut one or two cases out coming to committee when it went. Like, I do agree with you; it's quite needless. So if members are happy, then I can deal with those under the existing delegated powers, and then I think there is a need to look at delegated powers long term anyway, as I said in the email to you. But in the short term, certainly I could, street trading wise, could pull out the ones where they're in breach of a TRO and they're not fulfilling the policy and stuff.
That would be useful, thank you. Does anybody have any objections to that? Yes, I know you want to speak, Mary Claire. I'm just looking if any councillors have any objections. I know the ones who were on the committee, like myself, felt that the particular one in point of question was, you know, that there wasn't much we could do. Douglas, I know you were on that.
Yeah, yes, I was. I mean, I was on that particular committee. The principle about handing licensing officers the power to refuse applications under delegations will be a new step, and it isn't in line with what this committee agreed a couple of months ago. So I completely agree with Steve that there is a need for a full review of the delegations, but given that it was decided not to go ahead with that at the moment, so I think we're still in that situation. I agree it needs to be done, but probably up to officers to take the lead on doing that, and then doing it in a fairly thorough and systematic way when it happens, rather than piecemeal at the moment. So that's all.
Okay, Mary Claire.
I just wanted to say that in relation to the street trading specifically, well, actually anything licensing wise, the law requires that each case be considered in light of the policy, but not so that the policy automatically determines the outcome. So just with what Steve said, whilst I'd be happy to say that if there's a TRO in place, a TRO absolutely trumps your street trading consent. So if there's a street TRO on the site that an ice cream van, for example, has asked for, I wouldn't have a problem with officers saying, no, that's an absolute because there's a TRO. But if it is just something that they're in breach of the policy, then I wouldn't feel comfortable with officers automatically refusing, because licensing case law says that, like I say, it's a guide, but the policy shouldn't automatically determine the outcome.
Thank you, Mary Claire. Douglas doesn't seem to be in favour of that. How do you feel, Karen?
Oh, sorry, no, I'm more or less in favour of that, so I agree completely with Mary Claire.
Oh, right, sorry, I thought you were saying they shouldn't have any powers. We were only talking about where there is a TRO. We weren't talking about anything else. Mary Claire's clarified it, yeah. But you're happy with that? You're happy with that, Douglas?
In terms of the delegations, I mean, I think I'm not suggesting we suddenly make a change to our delegations right now, which I don't think conflicts with what Mary Claire was saying.
I know, I was just trying to clarify what Steve said. He said he could go through the applications and look to see if there were any TROs or applications in breach of the policies. And I was just wanting to separate the two. Currently, the TRO can be an absolute refusal from the outset. I mean, it could even be, I don't know if there's some sort of pre-application thing that an applicant could do to see whether or not there is a TRO, and they have to come to you and say there is no TRO on this pitch. Get them to do the work with highways or whatever, so that by the time it comes to you, you don't need to then do that check. But I was just wanting to separate the absoluteness of a TRO rather than the policy, which is there as a guide and is to be applied, but doesn't determine the outcome as an absolute. That was all I wanted to separate.
So are you saying that you feel that as things stand at the moment, licensing could do that with a TRO without us changing the delegated powers today?
Well, licensing can't refuse an application.
No.
But an application also can't be granted where there's a TRO. So I'm wondering if this sort of maybe is a more straightforward way would be to get an applicant in the first instance to check whether or not there's a TRO, or we take, I don't know, is there a way that you could kind of take an application, if there's a TRO, then they get a refund? The case the other day, there was the TRO, they'd made the application in March, there was a TRO in place, so it wasn't going to get granted, but nobody had spoken to them between March and July, which I think was the main problem. From when we dealt with all the street trading stuff, I can't remember when that city centre stuff came out years and years ago, there used to be quite a lot of dialogue between officers and a consent, somebody wanting a consent site. So it kind of felt to members and to myself that they made the application in March. Somebody could have rung and said, there's a TRO on that pitch. Let's see if we can find something else that works round and about, and then move your application to a different site. I think this sort of dialogue was missing, really.
Yeah.
Can I just echo that, because I completely agree with that, and it's actually helpful to Steve, now that you're here, just to draw that attention, your attention to that issue. I think, to be fair, that was a one-off, but also, to be fair, it was one that didn't look particularly good on the licensing committee. So from the person who'd applied, as I said, it was 4.5 months ago before her case got to a hearing. By that time, all we could do is point out that the application was doomed to fail because of the TRO, and sort of say, well, yes, someone could have told you that earlier on. It's just that no one had picked up on it. I think the city centre management team have commented that licensing hadn't sent them the application as they normally do and would have expected, and there were other comments in there. I suspect it may just be to do with all the confusion that kicked off around the lockdown at that time, so a victim of unfortunate timing. But that was the issue. And as Marie-Claire says, earlier conversations to resolve issues before them come to committee would have been useful. It's not the same as changing the delegations.
Thank you. Yes, Steve, would you like to reply to that? I know,
Chair.
Karen, you wish to speak.
I didn't know. I don't specifically know the individual application until you emailed me. But I think from what I'm hearing, it's more of an issue that the process hasn't been followed rather than we need a delegation. I'll follow this up with staff, because we should be contacting highways and we should be contacting city centre management. That's part of the process. And obviously with highways, if it has a TRO in place, it's, well, can the applicant apply for an amendment of the TRO, which I know they can, but they'd have to pay for it, or is it an absolute no, there's no way we're amending the TRO in this? And then in that case, then we should be going back to the applicant and saying, look, there's no way you're going to get this. Do you want to look for another site, and we'll work through it with you? So I'll speak to officers and reiterate the process that we should be going through.
Okay, right, thank you. Karen, you would wish to contribute?
Yeah, I just want to come in to say I liked Marie-Claire's suggestion, and about, is there something we can do in the application form that asks that, have you checked if there's a TRO, and then signposting them to wherever it is they need to be able to check that, or providing the highways email address or something so they can check it out before they make the application. And maybe a little explanation about, you know, if there is a TRO in place, you won't be able to, or what the process is if there is something there before they fill their application form in. I think we can just be a little bit clearer and smarter about it. That's all. And then then I presume we wouldn't have to worry about whether we're including this in the delegations, because if that's all sorted out before we even get to here, it won't be an issue, will it?
You okay with that, Steve? Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. That.
Yeah. So what we're saying is, it is a matter of process, not to do with delegated powers, and we need to check the process. And you're undertaking that you look at the particular case. Although I accept what Douglas says, it's not the only one that we've had where there's been a TRO. There have been others, and so therefore, you know, we really must be watertight, I think, on going through the procedures, mustn't we? Right. So thank you on that. Does anybody else have anything, Karen?
Sorry, just coming in on that, because I had one that was a TRO as well, but it was where it was an existing person on a plot and then a TRO came in afterwards. I think that needs to be built in there, that they don't just take it for granted that there is, because there wasn't one last year, there might not be one. I'm just thinking about seasonal workers. Something could have changed, so we need to prompt them to double check before they put their application in again for the following year. That's all.
Yeah, very true. Bob?
Thank you, Chair. Now that we've finished that particular item, I'm sorry, my electronic hand was up on the previous item, and I just wanted to comment and extend and support what Marie-Claire had said about events in parks, bearing in mind the events in Entcliffe Park last week. That is, bearing in mind that this is a public meeting and members of the public may be observing, although it doesn't concern ourselves as a licensing committee, if people are organising events in parks, I think we should put on record the fact that anyone organising events in parks do need the prior permission, i.e. a sort of license from the Ports and Countryside Department or from the major events team at the town hall. I mentioned this, A, for public knowledge, but secondarily, with specific reference to the events which had some unfortunate ancillary outcomes in Endcliffe Park last Thursday. And that is that the organizer of that particular event wasn't aware that it required council permission, but the police informed us. There were 3 of us down there, 3 councillors were down there at the public's request once the event got underway. And the police did inform us that the organizer was most compliant, cooperative, and once he was told that he should have had a prior license to hold the event, he closed it down and moved on. Just for information, and so that fellow colleagues, councillors, should they come across a similar problem in their own wards, are mindful that a council licence for any organised events in parks or public spaces is required of the organisers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Bob. Adam?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, because I think Bob's got a point, because I think sometimes it can get a bit confusing. So I think, you know, some clarification of what's required for what and when and what it comes under wouldn't be a bad to sort of maybe I hate to sort of say this, but if the officers haven't got anything better to do, and I'm sure they actually have, but you know, like a really quick and easy guide for local councillors, you know, what do you need a license for, and which license is it, who do you contact, the kind of things. Because am I also right in thinking that there were some unfortunate incidents as well? You know, it seems that the guy who organised it, absolutely fine, did things in good faith. Things can go wrong, and as soon as you realise what he should have been doing, you know, did everything he could to comply. But I am aware also, and I suppose the wider point I was going to make is one of the reasons why we can decide not to grant a licence. One of the licensing conditions is the possibility of criminal or antisocial behaviour. Now, there has been some evidence that can happen in a large outdoor event. We would want to know what an organiser was doing to minimise that risk before we actually gave it permission. So I don't know how relevant it is to this particular bit that I sometimes get a bit lost in the detail, but I think it is an important point, because as far as the general public are concerned, we've allowed the event or we haven't allowed the event. And if we haven't allowed the event, could we have stopped the event? So I think we need to be very clear on what we can do and what licensing can do, but also if people have concerns, where we can refer them on to. Hopefully that makes some sense, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Adam. I know Dawn has indicated, can I just say we are supposed to be discussing delegated powers at the moment, so I don't think we should get into a big heated discussion on this. I think it was helpful that Bob brought it up for people to understand. Dawn?
Sorry, I can speak to Adam later if we're not discussing it here, Chair. I was just going to say that there are systems in place to ensure that those kind of issues are dealt with when applying for a licence to use a space. The application has to go to South Yorkshire Police, and you have to evidence in your application all of the measures that you're taking to prevent and for safeguarding and all that sort of stuff. So nobody would get one unless they could evidence that, I'm sure.
Question answered, Chair.
Okay, thank you, both of you. Right, going back to delegated powers, does anybody have any more questions of Steve? No? Are we all okay with that? Right. I presume we're making the decision now on air. We don't go into private session for this. Is that right? Someone speak to me?
That's right.
Yeah, we're making the decision now. Right, okay. So, Steve, if you could give us the options, please. You need to unmute yourself, Steve.
Sorry. Yes, Chair, the options are set out in paragraph 7.1 to amend the delegations and review them again in 2 months, to leave the delegations in place and review them in 2 months, or to remove the delegations.
Right, thank you. Does anybody want to speak on the options? Adam?
Just so gut reaction would be option 2, which is, I think it's similar to, until we're out of the COVID crisis, you know, I think we do, I'm happy with the with what's in there, but I think it does need reviewing regularly. Thank you. That's
Thank you. Karen?
I'd just like to second what Adam's just said. I think leave it as it is for the next 2 months. Then might have a clear review in 2 months' time.
Yeah, certainly that's my view as well. Does anybody else have any different views? No, so we are all in favour that we go for 7.2 to leave the delegations in power and in place, sorry, and review in 2 months. Yeah, so we all happy with that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Good.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. Right, I take it at this point we now go into our training session, don't we?
Yeah.
So I presume it no longer then is open then to the. That's right. So, so thank you, Kate. Well, the meeting is concluded now, Kate. So thank you.
But I'm not sure, Kate, but I think people are staying. It's just, it needs to be private. Yeah.
That's fine.
Thank you.